Right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. And yeah, let me just pull up my notes real quick. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Brianna Mihalovich, and I am the Professional Development Coordinator here at Campus Compact. And we are so excited about our partnership with the Academy of Community Engagement Scholarship as co-creators of this series. ACES is an organization that recognizes exceptional leaders who live at the intersection of academics and communities to benefit society. And together, we bring you this series on addressing wicked issues through community engaged scholarship. This year, our series is focusing on our climate and our health, where we explore the impacts of climate change on health and how higher education can make a difference. Leading the charge in that conversation is Campus Compact's Design Fellow, Rebecca Forsythe. And before I hand things off to her, I do want to highlight some other ways that you can get involved with Campus Compact. If you're interested in Campus Compact's professional development offerings, I have a link that I will drop in the chat where you can learn more and explore our upcoming programs and events. And if you have any questions, you can also email our team at our compact.org email, which I will also drop in the chat. And without further ado, I will pass things off to Rebecca.
Perfect. Hello again, folks. So I'm Rebecca. I'm this year's Wicked Issues Design Fellow and your moderator for this webinar series on our climate and health. So today we'll be having a panel discussion with some lovely environmental sociologists on the role of student civic engagement in higher education as an important intervention for mitigating the effects of climate change on health for various populations. So throughout these sessions, we will ask webinar attendees to share any resources or materials that you may have personally that help you in your work in addressing climate change and health. So be on the lookout for a form that might be dropped in the chat. And after our 5-week webinar, we will compile all of these resources into a more kind of comprehensive knowledge hub that will be accessible on Campus Compact's website. And lastly, we will have time for a Q&A after our presentation. And so Brianna and I will be fielding those questions. And so please, as we kind of have these discussions, think of anything that might come up and submit those questions either in the chat or in the Q&A function. So I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. So unfortunately, we're unable to chat with Aiden, who is a Newman Civic Fellow at Clark University, so we'll miss him. But we have two lovely panelists, Azmal, Hossan, and Isabel Van Dyke-Johnson. So both are enrolled in the sociology PhD program here at CSU with me. And we collectively explore environmental and climate justice from various angles, utilizing environmental sociology as kind of an anchoring discipline. Azmal is a PhD candidate, and he explores community-engaged Indigenous-led climate change adaptation, decolonization of research, environmental justice, and science communication. And in addition, Azmal is active in local civic engagement efforts in Larimer County, Colorado, which I'm sure we'll hear more about as we progress through the panel. And then we also have Isabel. Isabel is a PhD student focused on environmental justice and energy equity, community-based knowledge, just transition, environmental policy, and mycology, which we share that interest. So her research with our advisor, Dr. Stephanie Malin, explores the relationship between environmental justice and AI data centers, which I want to ask you a little bit about today. So I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit. And then Isabel has also been working closely with local government in these areas, and she has also worked in federal research positions around environmental justice. So hi, friends.
Hello.
Hello, Rebecca. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. So barring my very short introduction of folks, would one of you tell me a little bit more about yourselves? So what might be important for our attendees to know about you and your work in this area? And we can start with you as well.
Okay. Yeah, like Rebecca said, my name is Isabel Van Dyke-Johnson. I'm a PhD student here at CSU studying environmental sociology. And again, I concentrate on issues surrounding environmental justice. I also serve as a researcher, a graduate student researcher here on the AI data center impacts, like she said. I teach I'm an assistant teaching a teaching assistant here for several courses. And I also work for our Center for Environmental Justice here. And I think you were going to ask us maybe more about our disciplinary backgrounds, but are you just hoping for like a brief thing here?
Just chatting about yourself. Just anything you think would be important. That's it.
Okay, I feel like I'll stop there for now.
Perfect.
Okay.
And Azmal?
Yeah, before I introduce myself, I would like to thank you so much for having me along with the fantastic other panel, Isabel. And I'd like to thank Campus Compact and also the other organizations who is organizing this webinar. And also at the very beginning, I'd like to say belated happy Earth Day. As many of you know that we celebrated Earth Day yesterday with a theme, Our Power, Our Planet. And also, although I am so much critical about the celebration of Earth Day, because you introduced me as a decolonial researcher, because I believe every day is Earth Day. And also, I'm critical to the celebration of Earth Day in one day in a year, given the history and background of how the Earth Day has started to be celebrated in 1970s, which is related with the environmental movement in the United States in 1970s, which are predominantly white, male dominant, and also I personally think as a colonial tool or as a greenwashing tool. Anyway, forget about it. But I'd like to say happy belated Earth Day. And also, I'd like to start with the CSU land acknowledgement. Because whenever we are talking about anything related to planetary health, or environment. I think this is the very beginning, specifically in the USA as a settler colonial state, that this is the very foundation of starting the conversation, acknowledging the land that has been, I think, grabbed from the ancestral many indigenous communities who have been living in this region for time immemorial. So I'd like to say the Colorado State University, where I am currently enrolled and also I'm talking from, is established on the ancestral and sacred land of Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations, the Ute indigenous communities, and also they are the original steward of this land. So along with this land acknowledgement, as Rebecca introduced me, my name is Azmal Hossan. I am a PhD candidate in the Department of Sociology. I think one interesting thing that all of us here are working with the same advisor, right?
Yeah.
Our awesome PhD advisor, Stephanie Mellin, who has, I think, expertise and also history of activism in environmental justice. And I'm originally from Bangladesh, and this is the identity why I introduce always myself as a decolonial public environmental sociologist, because probably you may know that Bangladesh is a South Asian country with history and legacy of British colonialism for almost 200 years. And not only that, why climate change is one of my favorite thing to talk about, because Bangladesh is globally known as a climate dystopia or one of the most vulnerable countries due to climate change. But the main problem is that Bangladesh has little or less contribution to the global warming process or climate change process. So, given my lived experiences in Bangladesh, I personally believe that um, climate change is not merely an environmental or natural problems, rather than it is one of the major social and environmental justice problems. And that's why in my PhD dissertation, I'm doing a community engaged participatory action research to explore how the revitalization of traditional ecological knowledge, which is threatened and suppressed by settler colonialism, can help indigenous communities in the Missouri River Basin to adapt with the changing climate. So for this project, I have been closely partnering with the Great Plains Tribal Water Alliance, a South Dakota-based indigenous grassroots organizations which has been working for indigenous climate change resilience through their treaty mandated water sovereignty in the Missouri River Basin. So you can think about like my PhD dissertation is mainly focused on indigenous climate change adaptation with a special focus on their water sovereignty or water justice issues.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much. So I am curious, if we're talking about kind of climate change and health, but we're also talking about civic engagement. And I know for folks that are in this kind of field, there's kind of a moment that you're like, oh, right, like this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. What really spurred y'all's interest in climate change and health? And how does your disciplinary training kind of contribute to that story, if at all?
Yeah, maybe we can keep going with me and then
Yeah, that's
as
good.
well next. Awesome. Yeah. So, I grew up, we were talking about this before, but I grew up sort of in between the city of Chicago and the outskirts of the cornfields of Northern Illinois. And when I was traveling between there to see family and friends on both sides of that spectrum, I really witnessed this disproportionate distribution of the industrial areas in Chicago, and the harms that those were causing. And I noticed a lot of my family that was in the city, closer to these industrial areas, had a lot of different health issues that I didn't see coming out in my family that was in the outskirts and the cornfields. And so I kind of had a that was kind of in the back of my brain when I decided to go to college and I wanted to pursue something environmental. That's what I would always tell people because I also was just kind of a outdoorsy person and CSU is just like, okay, well, I'll do something related to the environment. Um, but as I got more deeply into my undergraduate education, I started becoming interested in policy in particular, and I took a lot more environmental policy classes, specifically related to just transition and climate change and energy, or the energy transition. And that little thing in the back of my brain that had always been there, that passion started to connect around to what I was learning in these classes. And that's when I discovered environmental justice. And of course, like as Mal just mentioned, our collective advisor is Dr. Stephanie Malin, and her intro to environmental justice course way back many years ago. I won't age myself, but several years ago, really got these ideas that I had in my head connected down to these concrete ideas that were being studied and looked at in research in the literature and academia and in the private sector as well. So then as I was looking for jobs and things post grad, I really wanted to stay in this realm. I ended up doing my master's degree at the University of Denver and kind of staying in that environmental policy space, but also grabbing some, I don't like the word hard science, but maybe technical science in addition to the policy background. And that led me to working at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, where I worked as a social scientist. And that's it. I was able to kind of continue the EJ through line that I've always had in that position up until some federal changes that I'm sure we all have a pretty collective awareness of happen. And then now I'm back here at CSU. But that was initially how I became sort of passionate about this area and how I've stuck through it until where I'm at now in my career. So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, what an amazing and inspiring story, Isabel. Thank you so much for sharing. I think this is the same route for me. Why I'm interested in climate change, and also why I believe that civic engagement is so crucial if we want to deal with the like growing problems, specifically like climate change. As I mentioned, like I'm from Bangladesh, a country with high population density and limited resources. Although it was resourceful before the colonizers invaded the country in 1757, I think if you look at the statistics before the colonizers invaded the regions, the region are highly rich in terms of natural resources and other resources. But throughout the 200 years of colonizations, the region has become so poor and also having less capacities or capitals in terms of economic and other capital. So, as I mentioned, like climate change is my own living experience. I can recall I'm from a small family farming situation, and I can share here that in my childhood, I used to work with my dad in our agricultural field. And agriculture was the only, I think, means of subsistence for not only me, for millions of peoples in Bangladesh and in South Asia, and also in different corners of the world. But the problem is that agriculture is highly dependent on environment, on climate, and rice is the main staple food in Bangladesh, and rice is highly water intensive. You can't produce rice. So in Bangladesh, we have a lot of water, but it is a problem because Bangladesh is a land of river. It's a small country, but it's a land of river. And water is not only a problem in one way, it is a double-edged sword for Bangladesh. I can share you, like, since we have a lot of rivers, I think Isabel can relate it. It is highly similar to Netherlands. You have some family and friends in Netherlands. So it's a delta. So during the rainy season, uh, there are a lot of rains. But the problem is not coming mainly from environment. It is also related with the local geopolitics, local geography. So Bangladesh shares almost 54 transboundary rivers, who are the main source of fresh waters in Bangladesh, with India and China and other regional countries. And India and China are the big brothers in that region. And since they are in the upstream of the rivers, they have full control on the rivers. So during the rainy season, when there are a lot of precipitations and a lot of water in the rivers, and we don't need water, they open the water flows by opening the dams and barrages they constructed in the upstream. And every year, Bangladesh, if you just check in the media, that you will see that every year, not only one time, there are a couple of evidences or instances of floods, massive floods in Bangladesh. On the other hand, like when the dry season, we need water, they close the dams and Bangladesh is dried. So both rainy season and also the dry season, I can recall that my father and other our village neighbors, they really struggle to produce rice, and it hits hard for their food security. But the problem is that that's the point, like why I got interested in climate change, and also why I call climate change is an anthropogenic. That's the sociology I think is hitting that climate change is not merely an environmental problem, so rather it is related with our how our society is structured, how our society is formed, how the power, specifically like political power, are distributed among different groups, different classes, races, nations. And that's the point, like I started to think about like why and how the uh, power is unequally distributed. And this inspired me to study sociology because sociology studies how our individual living conditions are heavily impacted by the social structures and social forces. And I did my undergrad and one master's in Bangladesh from University of Dhaka, all of in sociology. And then I did my first master's thesis on indigenous livelihood vulnerabilities due to climate change in the coastal areas of Bangladesh. And then I did another master's at Texas Tech University, and that's the opening of the Pandora box because I'm pretty sure you and most of the participants or attendees today here are known about Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, one of the great climate scientists or atmospheric scientists, and also the most popular, I think, climate change communicators. So today, what I know about climate change, I would like to acknowledge that it is most of the contributions I indebted to her. I had a chance to work with her, and I received rigorous training on why civic engagement is so important, and why climate change is highly political in the USA, not only in the USA, but around the world, and how to deal with it. Probably we'll talk about it, what would be the strategy for civic engagement in the later. Yeah.
Yes, and that's actually a great segue. So, thank you all for sharing. It's interesting how like our interest in this area in particular are kind of formed by senses of place and whatnot, like, and those kind of shape our individual identities. And I think that's so fascinating. So considering kind of these life experiences that we have, and then thinking about kind of our unique disciplinary foundation in like having that in mind as kind of environmental justice scholars, but also more broadly, how do you envision the role of higher education in relationship to civic engagement? What is higher education's purpose in cultivating civic engagement?
That's a really good question. I feel like I might draw on my own experience here because my pathway into getting into civic engagement was through being a student. And first of all, I just want to start by saying that I think students in particular, and if you're an attendee listening to this, whether you are a student or you're somebody who teaches students, or engages with students often, I think we all have this same sense of like being a student is a really unique position to be in. It's simultaneously kind of overwhelming and you don't have a lot of time and you don't have a lot of space to engage with things, but you're also at such a critical age often, or even just like time of your life where you can get plugged into these opportunities, especially with higher education, right? There's a lot of opportunities and privileges that we have through our institutional connections and through the people that we meet in our institutions that can bring us to those places of civic engagement that we never would have gotten to if we were outside of this space. And of course, there's, other costs and benefits to the institutional hierarchy of academia and higher education. But um, when I was in undergrad, I remember this is just after the first Trump presidency had began. And it was kind of a really overwhelming time in higher education. I would say maybe not quite as overwhelming as this second round, but it was still a big shift and change. And there was a lot of localized civic engagement happening, especially on campus, because people were experiencing this thing that was really new for a lot of us and a drastic change in political regime that to be honest, a lot of us weren't really expecting fully, right? Or predicting. So I think that when I was there on campus, it felt a lot more right in front of me, and accessible than it was thinking, post being on campus all the time when I was just out in my adult life working. Those opportunities to engage locally were right there. And I feel like as somebody who was a student, that was great because, I didn't have time to be going off and trying to find things myself. But also now as somebody who later in life has both worked as somebody that has led student engagement teams and now I'm teaching myself. Um, I think that we, as kind of educators in the higher education space or staff members in that space, right, wherever you kind of fall on that spectrum, we have a responsibility to make these opportunities really accessible for the students and kind of put it right there in front of them for them to grab. And one thing that was really helpful for me in like conceptualizing how to do this is when I worked for the Environmental Defense Fund, when I was in my master's degree. This was when I was at the University of Denver. And I led the student engagement team and I planned a lot of student events. And I found that if you want students to engage with something, especially any type of like civic engagement or political participation, you have to make it realistic for them. It has to be accessible and it has to be at a time and in a space where they're actually going to want to be there. And I think sometimes when we're like not in that student mindset, we tend to forget that, right? Which is why it's also really important to have students in the room in spaces of higher education. And yeah, I just think that the more higher education just provides so many wonderful opportunities for students to actually get plugged into those spaces when normally that can be a little bit disparate and challenging to figure out what to do there. But yeah, I'm kind of rambling about solutions that you didn't ask about, but I'll stop myself there. But yeah, great question. Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah, thanks, Isabel. And I really like the questions because we are part of higher education right now. But I like the questions because I have been engaging with higher education not only in the USA but also in Bangladesh. So as I mentioned, I did my undergrad and master's from University of Dhaka. And before coming to the USA, I joined in a public university as a faculty and I taught there almost 6 years. So and then I came to the USA again, starting as a student, did masters at Texas Tech University, and currently doing PhD. So I have like a blend of experiences. If you think from global North perspective and global South perspective, and also as a student and also as a faculty, and also I worked here as a teaching assistant and also teaching instructor. So I had the privilege to engage like with students and also with faculties, both the Bangladesh and the USA. But before I dive deep, I would like to acknowledge one thing that I feel privileged to be part of Colorado State University because I know there are a lot of issues in terms of the history and legacy of colonialism. But at the same time, Colorado State University that is a land grant university. I feel like this is one of the I think best experiences in my life uh, on how to be engaged with the people, how to be engaged with the communities. The training I received through my graduate studies, through my interdisciplinary training, education, and research in food, energy, and water systems program, and also through my Rebecca knows about the Diana Wall Sustainability Leadership Fellowship at School of Global Environmental Sustainability. And community engagement, I think, is one of the core principles of Colorado State University. And I'd like to acknowledge or read the principles of community that Colorado State University has been exercising, like inclusion, respect, social justice, integrity, and service. So these are the principles I think every CSU RAMs believe in and also they try to pursue it, right? So, given the questions, role of higher education in civic engagement, I would like to share one story that I heard from the very beginning of my engagement with Dr. Catherine Hayhoe at Texas Tech University. So, Texas Tech University is located in Lubbock, Texas, northwestern region of Texas, which is highly conservative, you know. And talking about climate change is so, I think, sometimes awkward for people. So one story she shared, I think at the very beginning of the course I took with her, the Science and Policy of Climate Change. So it was her first year as an atmospheric science professor at Colorado, at Texas Tech University. And one of our colleagues from geology invited her to talk about climate change and how it is affecting our society, our economy, and our overall environment. And she was so happy because talking about climate change is one of her favorite things. And she showed up in the class at the very beginning, and she found that classroom is almost empty, right? And the students who are in the classes, they are so like sleepy, someone are busy with their phone. It seems like students are not so interested about the topic, but she delivered her lecture, and after delivering her lecture, she opened the floor for Q&A session, questions. And nobody was like interested to ask a question. But suddenly one student raised his hand and asked her that, "You are a Democrat, aren't you?" And she replied, "No, I'm a Canadian," right? So this is the point, like she was saying, and it was so much eye-opening for me because she was saying that, look, climate change, we judge or we deal with climate change based on our political ideology nowadays, which is nothing to do or nothing to work to deal with the climate change. And she was one quotations I can recall, and I think it will be so much like meaningful for me in my whole life. She was saying that thermometer does not give us the measurement of the temperature depending on whether we are conservative or liberal, right? So this is the, I think, eye-opening, I think, perspectives that why climate change has become so politically contentious in the US and also different corners of the world. And this is the problem when we deal with the community, deal with the students, deal with the mass people uh, about climate change. So people are often biased by their political ideology rather than the factual evidence of climate change, right? And that's the point. We need to make some strategy that how to deal with or how to engage with the people about on a topic which are highly politically divided. So one strategy I learned from her that why I'm telling the stories, because this is the higher education from where I received the training and where I received the perspectives, right? So one strategy she always like pursues and always ask people to uh, pursue that instead of starting our head, we need to start with our heart. Because why she's like not asking us to start with our head? Because our head is full of like data, science, facts, and which is not new about climate change. The scientists have been warning us about that planet is warming since 1850. And there are a lot of evidence, there are a lot of facts, there are a lot of scientific investigation that our planet is warming. But still, if you think about USA as one of the highest greenhouse gas emitters in the atmosphere. Still, climate change is highly politically contentious in the USA, and that's the problem. So that's why we need to start with our heart if we want to engage with the students, engage with the communities, engage with mass people. So starting with heart, what does it mean? Identifying the commonalities, identifying the common backgrounds rather than the differences is the starting point to talk about climate change. Because when people build their social identity by rejecting some facts, for example, like science of climate change, making argument based on the facts would be treated as a personal attack to them. So that's why we need to start with what is the commonality we have. That's the point we are talking about today, health. I think irrespective of we are liberal or conservative, everyone is concerned about their health, right? And health would be the, I think, most affected sector, whether it is human health, whether it is more than human health, because our health is not like coming from a vacuum. It is coming through our water, our food, our air we are breathing, and our food, our air, water, and our air are heavily impacted by global warming, climate change. So everybody is concerned about their health, and some of we are parents, some of we are concerned about our future generations, and they will be severely impacted by climate change. So our food system, our water system, our, for example, air system, and everybody is concerned about this. So identifying the commonalities, common backgrounds, shared values, and how our shared values are being affected by climate change would be the starting point for any civic engagement. And this is the point where higher education can contribute, because higher education has resources, higher education has expertise, higher education has, I think, most enthusiastic people to learn about, open-minded people in the society. And also there are a lot of, as Isabel shared, that in higher education, students need to go through some formal training, through curriculum, through coursework, through internship, through community engaged projects. Specifically, I would like to say in social science and humanities, these works are heavily grounded on community engagement. And that's I'm one of the examples that, as I mentioned, like I'm doing my PhD dissertation project, partnering with the Great Plains Tribal Water Alliance, a South Dakota-based indigenous grassroots organization, who are the hardest hit due to not only climate change, but also their marginalizations, their subordinations in the settler colonial socio-political and economic circumstances.
Amazing, guys. So what I'm hearing is that we need to find kind of effective ways to communicate to students to even get them into kind of these civic engagement spaces. So if we're descending into that kind of conversation, I'm going to get into the nitty gritty a little bit, the more the praxis kind of all of this. So I'm curious, you know, many of our attendees are educators or community engagement professionals. And so the desire is to spur student civic engagement in their work. And so in your role as a student, and then also kind of beyond your role as a student, how do you do civic engagement? What kind of practices do you do? And how do you what do you recommend to attendees who want to kind of do this?
That's a great question. And I feel like I'm best suited to answer this from my experience as a researcher, because that's kind of the best way that, or I guess the way that I go about community engagement most of the time is through my research. So do you feel like is that a helpful orientation to take there, Rebecca? Okay, awesome. So yeah, Azmal mentioned earlier that CSU in particular has really done a good job of preparing us and sort of training us in this way that promotes service and justice and engagement with both our local community, but also out in a global sense. Emphasizing that climate change, even climate science, often is political. And for me, as a budding researcher and, at the time as a student, I was feeling like when I was engaging with research, it felt very extractive. Every time I felt like I was almost like stealing knowledge from this community, writing it up, and then promoting it under Isabel Van Dyke-Johnson, right? And that just felt tough when I'm learning about when I'm supposed to be promoting this sort of service-oriented position in justice. And so I really found that that was the case when I was working in the federal context, because of course that's such a different level of like, you have a lot more funding and you have a lot more breadth in what you're able to do. And I really felt like our work was extractive at times, right? So this is kind of what drove me to try to help build a system that was more reciprocal. And so in the team that I was working in at the lab, myself and a colleague built a system where we committed to volunteering in the community for the same amount of time as we extracted something, such as having an interview with a person or something like that. So, for example, I interviewed a person. We were looking at transmission lines going through different communities at the time, and we were interviewing a farmer, and we spent an hour interviewing them, and then we spent an hour helping them around their farm. And we actually built this into our budget. And this is kind of now the norm in my former team at the Pacific Northwest National Lab. So I think for me, that transition from doing research on people to doing research for people, that's where I started to integrate it in more of a community engaged sense. Centering the lived experiences of people as a valid data point in the same vein as a number or a survey or a policy really, to me, embodies the idea of community engaged research. And of course, I think you could use the word research or civic engagement in the same vein, right? You could kind of flip those words. And I think doing that sort of service-oriented science, especially as social scientists, right? I think Azmal just mentioned this. As people in that realm, we really have a unique opportunity to use our work as a motivator and really a mechanism for social change. And so to me, we're ultimately working as social scientists, we are public servants, right? Our role is one of communication and spreading awareness and equipping people with the ability to make changes in things that they want to be changed, especially students, right? Because as you said, many of us are educators here. I think there's a lot of methods like community-based participatory research and other ways that are very functional about going about this. But at the end of the day, I think having that mindset that we are not engaging with communities in order to gather and to extract, but seeing it as more of a reciprocal conversation and space of knowledge sharing between two parties that have just a variation in experiences instead of like a hierarchical, like I'm the researcher, you are the participant. And so it's like a top-down sense, more of like a lateral, spectrum there. And students are really good at this. Like students, I've found personally have a really strong motivation to embody this reciprocity, especially in this younger up and coming generation. I think they really value this. I mean, I can't speak for every single student that I've ever met, but I think in general, it's fair to say that this generation that is entering into the higher education space right now are really oriented in this service. They're oriented in a service. I keep saying oriented, but they follow this pathway. And I think it's really, I see a lot of hope in that too. But yeah, I'll stop there and let Azmal add.
Yeah, thanks, Isabel. I really appreciate that doing research would be a starting point for community engagement or civic engagement. But I also would like to add here, like research would be a red flag for community engagement if you want to work with indigenous communities. Because given my experience both in Bangladesh and also in the USA, because indigenous communities around the world are the most researched communities. But the word research is the dirtiest word in indigenous vocabulary. So that's why I introduce myself as a public environmental sociologist. Why? Because we have done a lot of research on detrimental impact of climate change or yeah, there are still options or it's still scope to do research. But what I'm saying, why I'm saying this, because I feel like indigenous communities has been colonized in many different ways. But one way is the uh, epistemological violence, epistemic violence against them. I appreciate that you mentioned that research is an extractive tools, like extracting knowledge from them without doing any real world change in their life, right? So there is a huge lack of trust among the indigenous communities to engage with the researcher, specifically if they are trained in the settler colonial academic institutions. So one thing I need to clarify here that I am not only partnering with Great Plains Tribal Water Alliance for my PhD dissertation project, but also I work for them. I am an employee. I have been working with them in the last, I think, almost more than 3 years. So I have a like first-hand experience. What are the dynamics when we approach indigenous communities to collaborate together? So, and overcoming this lack of trust would be the first priority if we, as a researcher, to work with indigenous communities. And the most hardest thing is that you cannot overcome these barriers uh, over the night. This is because indigenous communities has been going through intergenerational violence, intergenerational trauma, intergenerational exploitation. So it requires also intergenerational healing process. And I think that's why we call like decolonization is a continuous process, is a lifelong process. You cannot decolonize everything over the night because colonization or colonialism is embedded in every aspects of our life, uh, every point of our lives. So given this perspective, I think like overcoming the barriers, like lack of trust is one of the building the like trustworthy and also confident mutual relationship is the starting point. And I really appreciate that you brought the word reciprocity and relationality. Like, what would be the outcomes or what would be the end game for my partners in my research project? Is it only serving my own professional development, my achieving my degree without doing any real ground change, positive change in their life? So this is the most point. And one thing, one starting point I'd like to hear say that um, data sovereignty is so I think important whenever we work with indigenous communities because as you mentioned their information, their knowledge, their data have been extracted for centuries. So we need to ensure data sovereignty, and one point would be effective to engage with indigenous communities like developing a data sharing agreement or data sovereignty agreement, like how the data will be used. Definitely in social science, we follow the research ethics through the approval of the IRB. But these IRB we are getting from our higher education institutions, our university, which are known as colonial institutions to the indigenous communities. So another point would be getting approval from their research ethics board. I think now many of the indigenous communities have their own IRB, own research ethics board. So that's why it is time consuming, like getting IRB from your university or in your higher academia, and also at the same time getting the approval from their research ethics boards. It's a time consuming, and that's why civic engagement or community engagement is not like a 1 day event or 2 day event. It's a continuous process. So this is my research perspectives, and along with my research perspectives, as Rebecca mentioned, that I've been working with Larimer County. It's a voluntary work. I'm serving as a member of their Environment and Science Advisory Board and also Air Quality Monitoring Advisory Committee. So why I engaged with these platforms? When I came to the Colorado State University, uh, uh, it was only 4 or 5 Bangladeshi students. Now we have almost 100 Bangladeshi students. And also, when I came, I found that there is a growing numbers of Muslim community, basically from Arab world and also South Asia and also some African continent. And I'm a practicing Muslim. But I realized that this growing community doesn't have any representations, any voice in any local government issues. So since environmental justice or environmental issues is my area of interest, I was looking like how the decisions are made in local government here and who are in the table when they make decisions on like water code or air pollution regulation or land use change, like or like housing code. And I realized that okay, there is a growing South Asian community and also growing Muslim community, but they don't have any representation in the local government bodies. So then I realized, okay, and it is procedural injustice, right? The local governments are designing, implementing policies for the people, but without any representation for them. And this is the training I got from my graduate studies, specifically in environmental justice. And this like inspired me to engage with the local governments, with Larimer County, to so that I can represent my community and also um, in terms of my like ethnicity and or racial identity and also my uh, uh, religious identity. So, and my experience is one thing I would like to, since I work with indigenous communities. So, in the very first meeting of Larimer County Environmental and Science Advisory Board, when I went there, I found the same scenario. Most of the people are white in the board, and they're welcoming. They are so warming, welcoming. But I realized that okay, Larimer County is located in the ancestral land of many indigenous communities. So whenever we are working on environment, like environmental board, where is the land acknowledgement? As I mentioned earlier, that this should be the starting point to do any environmental justice or environmental works. And then I raised the question that I don't see anything in Larimer County's day-to-day operations or in their website or anywhere that they have any land acknowledgement. Then I raised the questions that why shouldn't we start the process to acknowledge the land, that these lands are the ancestral lands or sacred lands of many indigenous communities, and they are the main stewards of this land. And I think the board was welcoming this proposal, and they realized that okay, this is a gap here in local government we need to work on, and they accepted my proposal. I think they forwarded it to the board of county commissioners. I don't know what would be the end game, but at least I tried to start the process that okay, we need to start about it. So this is the point, like as Isabel also mentioned, that our training in like environmental justice or so if you are committed by your own lived experiences, and also by your academic training, then you have like sort of knowledge and expertise to talk about it. And that's a privilege for us. And I'm so glad to be part of graduate students at Colorado State University, from where I have been receiving such training, such mentorship, and also such, I think, collaborations with all of you to enrich myself, and also to um, fight against all the uh, injustices.
Amazing. So thank you guys. We're gonna wrap up really quickly with just some last thoughts. So this work, heavy and daunting. Health inequalities are difficult to read about, especially when you think of them not as just data, but as people, and also kind of more than human kind of folks that are experiencing that harm as well. And so this can be especially daunting in civic engagement too. And so how do you cultivate hopes to sustain your work? How do you find joy? Just really quickly. Mine, crafting. Go.
One word?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Oh, I'll go really fast.
Yep.
Bring it down to the small things. I have worked in the federal context. I've worked for the federal government. I've worked for local government, and I've worked in my own community just as a human being. And I have unequivocally made more impact at that bottom level, per se, at the local, low scale level. We need to take care of each other in this sense. And I think reminding ourselves of how powerful it is to be able to take care of each other, that monster of all of the wicked problems, right, that has so many solutions and so many approaches, if we all take it down to face value, right, and we understand that we each have the power to take care of each other, that's a lot of stories of hope in a really small space. And also the youth in general gives me a lot of hope. Okay, that's my quick.
Yeah, our students are
Yes.
crucial for, I think, for cultivating hope.
Yeah,
Okay, Azmal, you have 30 seconds.
yeah. I think this is the one point we need to stick on it, because given the struggles we have been going through in the higher academia in the last couple of years due to the funding cuts, crusade against the research on environmental justice or climate justice, I think I also saw collective effort to fight against all the odds. And I think, and in that point, like higher education has the most progressive people in the country, in the society, and it is more convenient for us to engage with the people in higher education, and also we have a training from here, and also like from my own lived experiences. I'm from a post-colonial territory. We have a history of fighting against all the injustices, and uh, dismantling the colonial system in South Asia. So this is I think, my lived experiences, and also my uh, uh, like awesome and mind-blowing collaborations with my colleagues, with my mentors, and with my community members give me the hopes to be resilient against all the wicked problems.
Love it. All right, thank you guys. So we have one more session left in the webinar series. And so we have our closing session next week, we will be talking about climate hope. So we've been kind of collectively talking about how to address these wicked issues. And one of the key ways that we know is through resilience and also collective action. And so we have to think about, okay, how do we sustain these behaviors? And so climate hope is one of the ways that we are kind of thinking about that. And so we'll be talking to Rose Beauchamp. She's a professor of dance and she studies social justice in dance, which will be really exciting. So please join us for our last session. And then reminder that if you fill out this form and add in any information, that we will have kind of a resource hub available to folks after the sessions end. But thank you so much again, Isabel and Azmal, for sharing your thoughts on civic engagement and your experiences as students.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank
Rebecca.
you, Rebecca. One odd things like we talk a lot and there was no time for questions. Okay.
I don't see any in
Okay.
chat here, but
Yeah.
I think that our contact information too might have been shared in the initial outreach. So if there's any panelists listening that do end up have questions, I won't speak for Esmal, but feel free to reach out to myself with any questions. I'm happy to collaborate and respond and engage with each other. Yeah, thank you, Rebecca and Brianna, for putting this on, and thanks everybody so much for listening.
Yeah, same to me, Isabel. Thank you so much, Rebecca and Brianna. And I had a great time with all of you.
Thank you
All
all.
right, Brianna, is there anything else you need to share? All right, we're good. So thank you all for attending. And we're going to close out the session now. All right, bye, folks.